Good morning, class. Today we're going to be looking at how to do simple for loops in a flowchart. Um, so the idea with a loop is you're having, a section of code repeated. So what we need in our flowchart is something that looks like a loop, something that's constantly, going in a, circle, going repeated, going back to itself. So I've got a simple little flowchart here that's demonstrating the idea of asking the user to input a positive number. They input that number. I use an if statement to confirm whether it was positive or not. If it's not positive, so in other words it's negative, I print out as an invalid input and I'm done. But if the number they input was positive, what I want to do now is do a summation of 1 to that number. And then once the summation's done, print out the results. All right, so my control structure for a for loop is just a decision. Think about it. Your start, stop, step. The stop, which is your control expression, is just a Boolean. It's either true or false. In a for loop, if it's true, the for loop keeps going. And it stops when it's false. So here, I'm going to do a for loop just doing using I as my control structure. Now, I don't need to go into detail that I is going from 0 to the number and up by 1. I'm just using just I, and I'm not defining it, and that's fine. It's a really simple idea. We're just trying to demonstrate what's going to control this. So while I is less than number, if that's true, I'm going to increase sum by I, and then look, it go back to itself. See how this is like a loop? It's just constantly going from one step to the next, going back. So it's constantly repeating. Eventually, this is going to be false. I print out the sum, and I'm done. So that's the basic premise behind how a for loop works. Now I'm going to show you guys a more advanced one. I'm going to look at Lab 11, and I'm going to follow the solution I used for Lab 11, which was I used a slightly different way to solve positive and negative numbers, which is why my flowchart here looks a little bit different. So what you can do is you can pause this video and go back and watch the my solution on Lab 11, and you can look at that code there and compare it to this flowchart and see how they're designed the same way. Okay, so let's look at how this works. So Lab 11, you had to input a number, and then you had to do a summation from 1 to that number, but not just summing it up, but you also had to print out, it's like if you entered 5, 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4 plus 5 equals the sum. So I could probably streamline this a little bit in my flowchart, but again, I just wanted to make it a little bit closer to represent what the code looked like, so you can compare the two and get the idea of how a flowchart works. So I input X. If it's positive or negative, I go to the corresponding for loop. Now again, the stop, which is your control expression, that's basically, it's just a Boolean, and so we're using a decision here. So again, for flowcharts, for your for loops, just always go back to some sort of decision as your starting point of the for loop. So here's if it's greater than X, we calculate the sum, we print I, and we keep going, and it's constantly looping on itself. Eventually it's false, and we print out the sum. The other way, if it was less than or equal to X, calculate the sum. Remember, in this particular solution, again, you look at the lab, I used an if statement to figure out whether I was printing out an I and a plus sign or I equals the sum, and that's what that's demonstrating here. Then eventually, look again, they both loop back to the decision. So again, we got a loop going on over here. And then eventually that's false, and our code is done. So again, the basic idea of how to write a flowchart for a A for loop is, again, think about that stop. The stop is your control expression. Use that as a decision to determine whether your loop's going to run or whether your loop is over and you move on to the next section of code. All right, so there we go. There's some examples on how to do flowcharts for your for loops, and have a good day.